sure you are getting your ballot and getting it to the post office by Tuesday, November 3rd if you want to mail it in. So just some reminders as we start our conversation today. And today I want to start us out in our conversation with some questions for you about, why do you vote? What motivates you to vote? And that will kind of inform our conversation as we move forward, looking at communication and research related to communication and voter turnout. All right, so why do you vote? What motivates you to vote? So either in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself or raise your hand, you can do that too. In the chat, or tell us the reasons why you vote. What makes you want to vote? What gets you to the polls? If this is the first time you're voting, why are you voting in this election? So I just wanted to start out with that simple question. Tell us the reasons why you vote. We've got change. It's a way to make a difference. Everyone's voice matters. All right, to be heard for the sticker, okay. Other options to voice your opinion, for sure. It's the first time voting. To participate in democracy and to give myself the right to complain, yes. Because people struggled to get that privilege, for sure. Not everyone has always been able to vote. So to take that privilege seriously. If I don't vote, I can't complain. Yes. All right. So people are agreeing in terms of, why you vote. So you're motivated to participate in democracy, to have your voice heard. That's why a lot of us go to the polls. That's why we want to vote, because we want to have our voice heard. We want to, have a say in who our leader is, right? If you don't vote, then you don't count, kind of idea. Yeah, definitely, AJ. All right. So also in the chat, I want you to tell us what turns you off from politics. Why sometimes do you not go to the polls, or why might you not be voting in this election? What are some reasons that you're turned off from politics? All right, the tense conversations, people fight over opposing views, heated discussions, dishonesty. You don't think your vote counts? All right, maybe the Electoral College, you're not approving of the system. It's all corrupt. The divisiveness, right? It's confusing, there's controversy. Divisiveness, the negative ads, the flood of ads. I always vote, but the political commercials drive me nuts, right? All right. People invalidating or trying to change your opinion. All right, so there's reasons, why all of us are thinking about voting, are planning to go to the polls. We want to participate. We want our voices to be heard. But something that turns us off from voting might be the divisiveness, the negative messaging that we're receiving, and that might be why we aren't as motivated to vote sometimes. So what I want you to do as we go through this talk about the research and the tweets we're going to look at, I want you to think about, what types of messages in particular motivate you to vote and why, and also maybe thinking about what types of messages, turn you off from politics and perhaps lead you to not want to go out and vote. So we're going to look at some research, we're going to look at some tweets, and once I go through the research, showing you some tweets, we're also going to go into breakout rooms where you're going to talk about maybe some of the differences that you see between the 2016 election and the 2020 election, and what types of messages, again, make you want to go out and vote, and what types of messages, make you kind of not want to participate in the political process. So just kind of keeping those ideas in mind as we talk about some of the research and look at some of the tweets that we've been seeing from the presidential candidates in 2020. All right, so another question I have for you is, do you think negative campaign messages increase or decrease voter turnout? So you can just write in the chat whether you think negative messaging increases voter turnout, or you could either write increase or decrease in the chat. So we'll see what the popular opinion here is. Do you think negative campaign messages increase or decrease voter turnout? All right, so we're getting a lot of increases here, which is interesting. So why do you think it increases voter turnout? I'd like to hear your thoughts about this. So either in the chat or you can unmute yourself. Why do you think negative messaging increases voter turnout? Or what gives you that perception that it increases voter turnout? Does it make you want to go out and vote more?
Okay, I'm unmuting, Kelly. All right, no one's talking. So I sort of think that even though I get sick of seeing negative advertisements, I think part of what they do is they create a lot of fear. So if voters aren't educated into what the topics really are, they might just go off that fear factor and think like, oh, I don't know, they said all those terrible things about, you know, this person, so I want to make sure they don't get elected. And so I think that might increase it a bit.
Okay, so people are afraid of that, of that person actually getting elected, right? The negative things that they're saying about this person. I don't want that person to be in office, so I need to go and vote and make sure they don't get elected. All right. Other people? We're going to talk a little about some features of negative ads that, you know, might increase voter turnout and might make people want to vote. Overall, the research on the impact of message tone on voter turnout is somewhat mixed. So what we see in meta-analysis is that it doesn't support the idea that negative messaging really decreases voter turnout, and there is some evidence from these studies that negative campaign messaging can actually increase voter turnout. So there is kind of this sentiment that we hear that, you know, going negative makes people cynical and not wanting to go to the polls, but that's not what research really shows, right? That there isn't a decrease in voter turnout when there's more negative messaging. So what research has really started to look at, especially since the 2016 election, is looking at specific factors of negative messages that might impact voting and who people vote for and turnout. So we're going to talk more specifically about different features of negative messaging and what impact that might have. So the first one is this idea of negative attack ads or negative tweets. If they're perceived as truthful, that's an important aspect of a negative message. If the negative message is perceived as truthful, it can help the sponsor and hurt the opponent. So the first tweet I wanted to share with you is from Donald Trump from September 30th. And it says, "Nobody wants Sleepy Joe as a leader, including the radical left, which he lost last night," referring to the debate. He disrespected Bernie, effectively calling him a loser. So what do you think? Do you think that people might find that, even though, right, it's a negative attack tweet that we've got here from Trump, do you think that that might motivate people? Do you think that that would help Donald Trump? Would it hurt Biden? Do you think people would find this message somewhat truthful? What do you think people's responses to this tweet might be?
I'm unmuting, sorry. I don't think that tweet really does anything because, you know, Trump's audience who maybe perhaps agree with that, they're already voting for him anyways. And, you know, the people that were perhaps supporting Bernie in the primaries, I think most of those people are going to vote for Biden anyways. So they don't really care, at this point. Things are too far gone. So he's, you know, maybe giving a message that his audience might like to hear, but no one else is not going to sway any opinion either way.
Okay, so you feel like his supporters would find that message truthful, but they were going to vote for him anyway. So it's not going to have much of an impact. And people who are going to vote for Biden might not necessarily, that might not impact them either, because they either don't find it truthful or, you know, they had already planned to vote for Biden if they were Bernie supporters. All right. Okay. Amanda, did you have your hand up?
I did. Hey, everybody. Good to see you. I think at some point Trump's tweets are irrelevant. And as the person before me shared, it doesn't solidify things either way. I mean, the things that he says are just so far afield that it doesn't sway voters one way or the other. It becomes fodder for people who support him, and it also becomes fodder for people who make fun of him, because the stuff that is on Twitter and Instagram is quite honestly hilarious. And he's not clever. If he was even clever about it, it might sway some people, but he's not.
Okay. All right. So do you think I think you make a good point that maybe this isn't going to sway voters one way or the other, but do you think tweets like this might encourage people to be more likely to make sure that they vote, I guess, right? So to increase the likelihood that Trump supporters are going to go out and vote if they see this message?
I would say it does. I think it's additional evidence that he is really out of touch with reality, and he acts like a fourth grade bully name calling.
We're going to talk about this idea of like incivility, this rudeness, this name calling, and whether that motivates people to go out and vote. Does that increase turnout? And so that's certainly an aspect that we see, especially on Twitter, right? That we see this name calling, and that there's some evidence about how that impacts voter turnout that we're going to talk about too. All right, let's see. Okay, so we have some comments. I think the tweet will be perceived as childish, immature, and pushes people to the polls even more to get them out. All right, so it's kind of humorous, but it starts the discussion about the opposite side in favor of Trump, right? So part of Donald Trump's, when he tweets, he does generate a lot of retweets, likes on Twitter. The news media starts to cover what he's saying on Twitter. So even if it's not necessarily positive coverage of his tweets, it does bring him more coverage, more attention when he's tweeting some of these things. So that's something else to think about too in terms of the impact of his messaging, because he is getting more attention because of what he's tweeting. Then we also have this one from Joe Biden, which came out the night of the debate. He said, "You've heard a lot come out of President Trump's mouth. Can you name one thing he said to actually make your life better?" So again, this is a negative tweet about Donald Trump and what he had said on debate night. So what do we think about this tweet? Does you think this tweet motivates people to vote? Does it convince people that they should vote for Biden over Trump? What do you think the impact of this tweet might be? Got a lot of love on Twitter, 722,000 likes.
Yeah, Kelly, hi, it's Donna.
Hi, Donna.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It seemed like people like this one a whole lot more. So
Yeah.
I don't know how that translates in getting people to vote, but it seems like it would.
Right. So, I mean, so we can't necessarily make a causal attribution of whether specific tweets actually get people to go to the polls, but we can look at, how much attention they get, how many likes they get, how many retweets we're seeing from these posts. And Joe Biden certainly did get a lot of love on this particular tweet. So, it's a negative tweet. It's an attack tweet that we're getting here from Joe Biden, but it seems this approach, at least for Joe Biden, is getting more attention on Twitter than what we see from Donald Trump, at least in this particular context. All right, so so I felt the two tweets were just attempts to bring each other down, which I felt was not helpful. But I felt that at least Biden's had relevance, is what we're getting in the chat here. And so the tone and the formality, right, of the tweet might lead us to think that, Biden's is more, about policy, about what is being said. But, if you look at Trump's tweet, it does, talking about including the radical left, which he lost last night. He disrespected Bernie, effectively calling him a loser. If you read between the lines and what was said in the debate, that is also about policy, in terms of whether or not Biden is going to lean more toward, Bernie's type of policies or is going to be more moderate. But the tone, the style of the messaging is certainly different. And so you might see some people liking Biden's tweet more and other people enjoying Trump's tweets more. Right. So some things to think about. And the next tweet I'm going to show you kind of leads us into this conversation about incivility, which we've mentioned already. And I want to know what you think people's reactions to this tweet might be. And so this came out last night on Donald Trump's Twitter. It says Biden for resident, and it has a picture of a nursing home, and Joe Biden's face is photoshopped onto one of the residents' bodies. And so this tweet, at least so far, has 514,000 favorites on Twitter, likes here. So what do you think people's reactions, different people's reactions to this message might be? So not just your own reaction, but how do you think other people might react to this? Because we're getting a lot of childish, shady but sad, unfortunate. But so these, I'm assuming, are your reactions to this message, but how do you think other people might react? So I'm sure many people found it funny, we're getting, right? How do you think this might translate in terms of support? Offensive if you're a senior, for sure, right? His base will love it. Funny and truthful. So, you know, Trump has really been pushing this narrative of Sleepy Joe, Biden for resident, kind of this idea that Joe Biden is older, he's forgetful, and hilarious proves his base point. He's really hammering down on this particular aspect of his attacks on Joe Biden. And it seems that at least his base is responding by engaging with these types of messages. So that doesn't specifically tell us whether or not that makes people more or less likely to vote for him, but people at least are engaging with this type of messaging. Do you think that this type of messaging would encourage turnout, make people less likely to vote? What do we think?
Oh, may I speak?
Sure, go ahead.
Hi. I just think it just reinforces people who are already certain on voting for Biden. It just reinforces how important it would be to vote for Biden.
Okay, so that people might be more likely to vote for Biden if they see Trump sending out these types of messages. So you think that might encourage turnout among Trump, people who don't support Trump? Okay.
Yes.
All right. All right, we're getting some agrees here. Yes. What do we think about Trump voters? Do you think that this would motivate them to go out to vote? Messages, maybe not specifically this type of message, but messages like this?
I guess I'll speak again.
Right.
They already expect this behavior from him, so it more of they're used to this, and this is what they expect from him. So it wouldn't, I don't know, it wouldn't like push them away from Trump. It would just be like, okay, that's my president, basically.
Okay, so just kind of confirming what they've seen before. So this is type of messaging that you might have seen before. So it might, just reinforce your point of view about his particular strategy when it comes to messaging.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. And okay, so he's straight, there's no BS. Saw this on a car this morning. All right, so this idea that, the way, and we saw with the tweets on the earlier slide that Biden certainly uses more formal language, even in his tweets, language that we tend to see in political campaigns, where Trump is more off the cuff and just says kind of what he wants to say, what he's thinking, and his base seems to appreciate that. They find it, they tend to see him as more honest, more his base when he tweets these types of things. This is what he's thinking. It's not something that he's being as strategic about, right? This is entertaining, and this is what we want to see from politicians: is they're more like us, they're more like the common person, rather than this level of formality that you see with a lot of other political candidates on on a platform like Twitter. So it can appeal to certain voters when they see messages like this. They find it entertaining, they find it funny. It might drum up some enthusiasm for Trump because we see that it's getting a lot of attention, a lot of likes, a lot of retweets on Twitter. And so even though some of us might think that this is childish and rude, other people might find it entertaining and thus motivating. So when we look at some of the research, there's a lot of research that's been going on related to this, to incivility. And so incivility in research, there's some different definitions, but in the research that I'm going to show you here, incivility is about being disrespectful, name calling, rudeness. And so what some research in 2010 by Brooks found was that there was actually a modest increase in voter turnout when messaging was, more about disrespecting, name calling, and rudeness. And a study in 2020 looked at incivility and found that it increases enthusiasm. And the authors argued perhaps because some people find them more entertaining, right? So this use of incivility in political messaging, people think it's funny, they think it's entertaining. And so they're going to be more enthusiastic about the campaign because they feel more engaged and entertained by the campaign. But others have argued that we shouldn't see this incivility of messaging, like this liking and sharing of incivility, as we shouldn't see it necessarily as a connection as this is why someone might win a campaign, right? Just because people are amused by it, entertained by it, doesn't mean they're more likely to vote for someone because of that. And then a study in 2018 looked specifically at the level of incivility in Trump's tweets once he was president. And what they found was an association when there was more incivility in his tweets, there was a decline in his approval, a decline in perceptions of his warmth, a decline in perceptions of his dominance for almost all voters except for diehard Trump supporters. So the question, though, when you look at the research is, do people like this incivility when they see it in a campaign? But do they dislike this incivility when they see it coming from the sitting president? So is there a difference in perceptions of this use of incivility, in these two different contexts? I don't know, what do you think? Do you think that, and now it's different because Trump is the sitting president, but he's also a candidate. So how are people going to perceive this incivility? Are they going to perceive it as inappropriate and not motivate them to vote, or are they going to see it as, Trump back in campaign mode, and we find this incivility, entertaining, and we're enthusiastic about this incivility? I don't know if anyone had thoughts about that in terms of the difference between President Trump and candidate Trump, whether or not these types of messages might be more effective in one context or another.
I think during a campaign run, the harsh comments, I guess I'll say, it generates an us versus them mentality. So I think it assists people in making their decisions. But then in 2016, after he's elected, the entire goal is to unite the country. So I think that once people found that it wasn't some stick that he was just pulling for a campaign, and that he was actually going to continue to lead in such a divisive manner, that it actually was hindering the progress of our entire nation. So I think that that's probably why people who aren't his diehard supporters decided to pull some of their support.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, that people thought, this is a campaign strategy. And then once he's in office, he'll change the way he communicates and, the way he tweets, the style of tweeting, what he's saying will change. And we did, when you look at content analysis, immediately after he was, immediately after the inauguration, you saw more formality in his tweets. But as his term went forward and we got closer to the election, you saw an increase in some of this incivility. And so, I think he's always campaigning was a comment we've got here in the chat. And so we've heard him say that, allude to that idea. And so it'll be interesting to see how people, respond to this type of messaging, because in this campaign, it's different than it was in 2016, because now he is president, even though he's also a candidate, he is still the president. So are people going to perceive these types of messages differently now that he is, now that he's in office versus just being a candidate? So it's going to be interesting to see how people respond. All right, so the next thing I wanted to talk about was that Trump doesn't always go negative, right? Their analysis of his 2016 Twitter campaign and Clinton's as well showed both of them had about 50% negative messages, 50% positive messages on Twitter. It was a pretty even split. But we did see with Trump in 2016 was that he went quite positive in the 10 days before the election. So he was tweeting a lot of thank yous to different people, different groups, different people in different states. Now we see him tweeting a lot about basically, I'm going to win, right? So positive messaging and not really as many attacks on his opponent. What we saw Clinton do in 2016 was her tweets can remain fairly negative in the 10 days leading up to the campaign, more criticizing Trump. And also that the Twitter universe, if we look at a sentiment analysis, was also negative toward Clinton in the 10 days before the election. And so trying to anticipate, the messaging and the messaging effects, we might look at some of these trends to determine what are the best strategies for candidates in different parts of the election. So in the 10 days leading up to the election in 2016, we saw a lot of more positive tweets from Trump and negative tweets from Clinton. And that might have impacted some of the ways in which people voted or whether that drove them to the polls. We've seen Biden go positive too, as well. And the question is, are his tweets motivating people to go to the polls? That's, the question that remains. And so this tweet from Biden said, I helped pull this country out of a recession. And as president, I'll do it again. And this tweet got a lot of love too, 465,000 likes on this tweet. So the question I have for you is kind of, if you were in charge of Biden's campaign and Trump's campaign, what would be your strategy like in the last 10 days of the election? Do you think it'd be more effective to go positive, talk about winning, talk about what you'll do as president? Or do you think those negative tweets, those attack tweets might still have a place, in the 10 days leading up to the election? What would be your strategy if you were campaign manager? All right, we've got some go positives. Yes, go positive because everyone else attacks Trump anyway. So a lot of times what we see in campaigns is that you have these surrogates who are not the candidate and they're the ones that are attacking the opponent and the candidates are going positive. All right, I would be positively truthful on the state of the nation. And I think that's an important point, because I think that what you saw in some of the tweets from Clinton and what you see in some of the tweets from Biden is that they're talking about the negative state of the country and pointing out to people what's going wrong, right, and why you should be replacing Trump. And so the question is should that be the focus of your messaging, or should it be more about the positives of you as a candidate? Talking about like the 10 days leading up to the election. And so, positive as plans and values, positive kind of seems to be the way to go if you look at Clinton's tweets, at least, right? So the tweets aren't the only thing that's affecting the outcome of the election, but if you want to look at trends, it seems that positive messaging in the days leading up to the election might encourage turnout among your supporters, encourage people to vote for you. So, as we're looking at this election cycle, you can pay attention to some of these ideas of incivility, of positive messaging, of negative attack ads that might have some truth to it, and maybe try and anticipate, what the effect might be. And I also think it's a good thing for you all to think about as you're on social media, what types of tweets are you retweeting? What types of messages are you sharing? Are you going to share things that are negative? Are you going to share things that are positive? Are you going to share things that are rude and name calling, thinking about the impact of some of these messages on voter turnout and how people vote, I think is important for all of us too now, because we have the ability to affect the communication that's dominating our social media today as well too. All right, so what I wanted you to do at the end here is to go into breakout rooms and have some time and space to share with each other some of the ideas that you might have been thinking about as we've been looking at some of these tweets and talking about the effects of some of these messages. So I'm going to put you in some breakout rooms. I'd like you to select one person who's going to report back to the big group. And I want you to think about these 3 questions. So what similarities and differences do you see in message tone, strategy, content between the 2016 campaign and 2020 campaign? I think it's interesting to like sit back and think about, oh, but this was happening in 2016 too. It's kind of maybe a repeat of what was happening then. And also to think about, what's different in terms of the messages that we're seeing. And then what social media content about the 2020 election do you retweet or share or favorite or like? Thinking about tone, strategy, content, what types of messages are you sharing, are you liking? And then finally, what type of tone, strategy, content makes you want to vote, motivates you to vote, or motivates you to kind of not vote, I guess. All right, so once I put you in your breakout rooms, pick one person who's going to kind of write some of these thoughts down and then report back to the big group. And I'll give you about 10 minutes to talk to each other about these 3 questions, and then I'll bring you back. Any questions before I put you in the breakout rooms? All right, so, all right, here we go. All right, so it looks like we're all back. So who would like to share first about what their group talked about the similarities and differences between 2016 and 2020?
I can start.
Okay.
We couldn't really find any differences, but we did find some similarities on Trump. His tone in the 2016 was vicious, sexist, and racist. And in 2020, his tone was vicious, bashing Biden's age, and racist.
All right, so seeing some similarities there between at least what you've seen in terms of his messaging from 2016 and 2020, some similarities in terms of tone and content of his tweets. All right. Okay, thanks for sharing, AJ. All right, do other groups want to talk about similarities and differences that you're seeing between 2016 and 2020?
I can talk. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Grace, and then Tanya.
We focused like a lot on this question. We overall thought they were, similar in general, but they had some differences. One of the things we talked about was like the use of social media in general is just, I think, although it was only 4 years ago, I think it's accelerated on both sides of the aisle. I think both campaigns use it a lot more overall. I think that Biden tweets more even than Hillary did. Trump's always been a big tweeter, so I guess that's not too different, but their supporters and their advocates, I think, like their main people in the limelight use it more. And that there's more like memes and jokes made about Trump and Biden both. That was one main difference. And another difference we discussed is that like candidate-wise, in comparison to Trump, and possibly because like we talked about maybe people didn't think that Trump, it was really possible that he was going to get elected. It was kind of like a joke, like he's never going to win. But there was like a more visceral hatred for Hillary Clinton in 2016 that doesn't exist for Biden. And not that people don't dislike him, or people might think that he's unfit for to be president, but there's just like a serious like loathing for Hillary Clinton that people, even Trump supporters and anti-Biden people, don't feel for him to the same degree as they did for her. So that it makes the overall feeling of the campaign and the election different.
Yeah, I think that's a good point in terms of tone and content that you might be seeing. There were more attacks maybe that Trump was making on Hillary that were resonating with people in terms of what she'd done in the past. There was a lot of crooked Hillary and talking about her, was she trustworthy? And so there was, Hillary Clinton came into the campaign with higher negatives than we see with Joe Biden. And that can certainly impact tone and content and strategy of the candidates in this election because of the difference in those perceptions, for sure. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Grace. Tanya.
Okay. Yeah, we agreed about Trump's campaign. It seems to be the same sort of thing he did in 2016. In fact, I was surprised that he turned positive at the end of the last campaign. That was a surprising finding. I'm like, really? I don't remember that. We thought from the Democrat side that currently we're seeing, I guess, more of a relaxed tone for some of the ads. That some of them just seem to be giving the message of just go out and vote, and you just happen to notice that's a Biden-Harris advertisement. While it's not talking about the two candidates at all, just like a PSA, you should get out and vote. And I don't remember seeing that as much in 2016. So it just seemed a little bit more relaxed on that side.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that, when you look at some of Trump's tweets, it's like, we're going to win, right? It's this like very enthusiastic, we're going to win. It's going to be great. Everything's wonderful. And so from the Biden side, you might see more formal and informative tweets. And the question might be, is that motivating people to want to go and vote? Is that information, is that it's not negative, but is it overwhelmingly positive? Is that going to be enough to get people to want to go out and vote? To make sure that their ballot gets in if we're seeing this more relaxed approach. And it might be that, the Biden campaign doesn't want to be seen as engaging in much as, this negative tweets that you're still seeing from Trump. And so maybe they're changing their strategy to just be more like, make sure you vote. And that can be an effective strategy if you are ahead in the polls, right? So you just want to make sure that you're getting people to the ballot box, to drop their ballots off because you're ahead in the polls. And so you do sometimes see that strategy with people who are ahead in the polls. Just make sure that now is the time to just make sure that people know how to vote and get out and vote, rather than really trying to change people's minds at this point. Yeah. All right. Other people want to talk about similarities and differences that they've seen between 2016 and 2020?
The only other thing that we mentioned in our group, aside from Trump's negativity in 2016 and now, which seems to be pretty consistent, was the idea that Hillary was more on the defensive, particularly in the last month or so of the campaign. And so that affected some of the things that she was, so the Comey's October surprise about the email investigation and that sort of thing, that put her more on the defensive than might have otherwise been the case.
Yes, so that's certainly, she felt like she had to defend herself and defend the investigation into her emails. And so that can certainly impact the tone in terms of negative versus positive. It might be seen as her trying to defend herself and going negative rather than being able to focus on the positives, in the last week or so of the campaign. So, those October surprises, things that are new, that are different, that come out right before the election can certainly impact content and tone as well. And so we'll see what happens in the next few weeks here as well to see if there are any of those October surprises that change strategy and content. All right, so let's move on to the last two questions. What social media content about the 2020 election are you sharing, are you liking, and what type of tone, strategy, content makes you want to vote? What did you talk about in your breakout rooms?
I basically said that I would retweet Biden's tweets about the 2020 election because his are always positive and meaningful, whereas Trump's, they make no sense.
All right, so you're more likely to retweet things that you feel like have substance to them, and you understand, and those are the things that you would be more likely to retweet. All right.
Yes.
Okay, makes sense. All right. Other people, what kind of media content are you retweeting, sharing, liking?
In my group, we were talking about how since it's kind of a lot more split this year, and both parties are pretty intense about their feelings, we tend to post more things that are less controversial to kind of avoid conflict, especially on our own social media accounts.
Okay, so things like maybe, just get out and vote. Those types of messages, is that what you mean by things that aren't controversial?
Right,
yeah. Yeah, and I mean, that can be a way to participate in the political process without getting involved in all the controversy, just kind of encouraging people to go out and vote. And that more neutral or positive messaging might be effective as we get closer to the election. All right. Yeah. Other people?
We sort of fell in, I think, about 4 different categories of things we were retweeting, and sharing. One, as others have said, the voter information, how to, when to do it, that sort of thing. We have a lot of fact checkers, and we like to retweet factual information. Amanda referred to herself as a fact shamer, as opposed to a fat shamer, and to try to combat conspiracy theories. News about candidate appearances, just to get people engaged in seeing what the candidates are actually doing, and then either funny or factual. Funny sort of content that just we need a little levity in this election. So that seemed to be the big thing.
Yeah, I think those are some key categories if we're trying to define the types of things that you might share or like. Humorous things that we've seen, Biden in the past week or so posting some things that are humorous, you know, the fly situation there that offered some humor into the campaign that wasn't really, I mean, you know, I don't think most people would say that it was incivility, right? It was, you know, something light and humorous that was getting a lot of attention on social media. And so a lot of people are retweeting and sharing things like that. And so thinking strategically about how you can develop messages that are positive, that are, you know, funny and humorous, but not necessarily seen as attacking your opponent, seem to be getting a lot of likes. Yeah.
We especially like the when social media was on their game and Biden, you know, at one rally anyway, Trump had said, you know, if I lose, you'll never have to hear me again. And all Biden's team did was, you know, add I'm Joe Biden and I approve this message to the. We thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, and so, you know, seeing those attempts at humor and like you said, it can be a very, right now it's certainly in a time when people are anxious and worried and overthinking a lot of things. And so seeing some of that humor in a context like social media, people appreciate, right? And so we are seeing a lot of people like and retweet messages like that. So, you know, leading up to the election, more messaging like that from the campaigns that, you know, combine this idea of voting, but also with this humor, you're probably going to see a lot of people retweeting and liking things like that. So strategically, and especially in the last couple of days, thinking about how you can, you know, make people want to be entertained and engaged and vote in using that approach can be particularly effective. Yeah. All right. So I guess the last thing I want to see if anyone has any thoughts about, you know, what type of content makes you really want to go out and vote? Or what type of content makes you not want to vote? And maybe thinking about, again, you know, what you might be sharing, what you might be liking on social media. What do you think about that in terms of really, you know, making, what type of content really sticks in terms of making people want to go out and vote?
Definitely like types of, I guess, especially on like Trump's side, but just an inaccurate campaign strategies and misinformation. I remember there was I forgot where she was, but this was back in 2016 election. But Hillary Clinton, she was talking about just the coal industry and how even though her plan was to like end the coal industry and everything like that, but she was making an emphasis on pitting and giving these coworkers into other industries like renewable energy industries to still have them use their skills and still be able to like to make money and everything. But Trump, she said, I'm sorry, yes, she said specifically, we're going to have a lot of coworkers lose a lot of jobs or something like that. And the Trump campaign, instead of like using the full thing that she said, they like took the specific part. We're going to put a lot of coworkers out of work, and they use that to they just use that as another part of their long array of smear campaigns and stuff like that.
Yeah, so certainly, you know, we're seeing as campaigns are getting more sophisticated in manipulating messaging, we're seeing a lot of things that are taken out of context, and they perhaps don't appear that they're taken out of context because we're seeing the candidates use their own words, but they're taken out of context. And so we've already seen some messaging like that in the last week or so, and so that can certainly affect people's desire to vote and who they're going to vote for. And so, you know, kind of related to that fact checking idea, you know, maybe a lot of posts that are kind of checking those types of posts, taking things out of context or manipulating messaging to make sure that we're getting accurate information about what candidates are actually saying, might be important to monitor as we're looking at the social media landscape for sure. Yeah. We're getting some comments about celebrity posts and retweets and things like that. But changing your personal opinion. I haven't really seen a lot of research specifically looking at celebrities' posts and what they're sharing and what's impacting, people's desire to vote. You will see, as I was preparing for this talk, looking at like Jill Biden's post, Kamala Harris's post, what type of reactions they're getting, and they're getting a lot of likes and retweets on their social media accounts as well. And so, looking at some of those other players on the campaign to see what they're tweeting and the effect that they might be having, I think is important to monitor as well. Not, just what the candidates themselves are posting, but what people, especially maybe close to the candidates, are saying too. It will be interesting to see what kind of effect they'll have on people's desire to vote. I think, those celebrities can certainly impact voter turnout. So we've seen campaigns in the past, like, the Rock the Vote with, MTV, those campaign efforts have certainly increased turnout, especially among younger voters. And so you might be seeing that same impact, at least on voter turnout, among young voters, looking at these celebrities and them encouraging people to vote and how to vote and when to vote and things like that. So I think celebrities are definitely important people in terms of getting out the vote, encouraging voter turnout. All right, other people, any last thoughts about, what's going to make you get out there, get to the polls, cast your vote? Is there any messaging that you're like, yes, this would definitely make me get out to vote. I should be sharing these types of messages?
The observation in our group is that no amount of social media at this point is going to keep us from voting. That there are a lot of things that the current resident of the White House has done that motivates us beyond anything that we will see in advertising or anything. But that was just our little neck of the woods.
All right, so there's no amount of negative messaging is going to prevent you from getting to the polls in this particular election.
If I have to crawl there on my hands and knees, I'm going to vote.
In this, it's going to be interesting, and I think seeing a lot of this messaging about getting, you can vote early, you can vote by mail, is going to might have a very big impact on this election, like making sure people actually get to vote and making a plan to do that. And you're seeing a lot of messaging, a lot more messaging this time around because of the pandemic, about making sure you have a plan, how you will vote, and making sure your vote will count. And so, yeah, that's a really important part of this election. Yes, and we have more conversations about voting tomorrow. A virtual panel from 12:30 to 2 with some LaSallian representatives. And so that's another conversation that I think will be informative for all of us as we're talking about what might happen in this election, how we're going to vote, our plan for voting. And so I encourage you to register for that event, which is again tomorrow at 12:30. LaSalle Votes 2020. So, all right, I really appreciate you all engaging in this conversation. I hope you got to chat with each other about, the effects of messaging on your plans to vote, your likelihood to vote, and we'll see how this election season unfolds. And it'll be interesting to, monitor Twitter, monitor social media, see how this messaging might be impacting the 2020 election. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. I hope you have a good week, and I'll be seeing some of you soon.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you.
Bye, Kelly.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.